What founding father was sly as a fox, looked like a bird, and was likened to a salamander by his political opponents? I'll tell you, but you gotta keep watching. Hi, I'm Aaron Killian. Welcome back to Dead, White, and Blue, the YouTube series that takes a closer look at the final chapters and final resting places of famous dead Americans. Today, we have an outline of the life and death of Elbridge Gerry, a founding father whose legacy resonates today. Let's take a closer look and find out about Gerry's life before death. Elbridge Gerry was James Madison's vice president from March 1813 until his death in November 1814. Before rising to the rank of VP, Gerry was a Revolutionary War-era patriot, a delegate to the Second Continental Congress, a signer of the Declaration of Independence and Articles of Confederation, and a proponent of the Bill of Rights who refused to sign the Constitution. Mid-career, he was a one-term governor of Massachusetts, and during his tenure, the state's Senate districts were redrawn along highly partisan lines. One was so misshapen it was said to resemble a salamander. It was this event that led to the coinage of the word gerrymandering, a term referring to the practice of political officials altering district boundaries to create unfair political and/or party advantage. All right, time to get 6 feet deep on Elbridge Gerry. Gerry died at age 70 on November 23, 1814, at a boarding house in Washington, D.C. The year before his death, Gerry suffered a stroke which left him worse for the wear. In appearance, he was said to resemble, quote, a scant-patterned old skeleton, which is in keeping with the long-standing appraisal of his colleagues, who always thought Gerry looked like a sickly, nervous bird anyway. In late November of 1814, Gerry was perched in the vice presidency and serving as the presiding officer of the United States Senate. He lived in a boarding house near the United States Capitol, which had been temporarily relocated to the Patent Office building during the War of 1812. On the morning of the 23rd, he awoke with chest pains and told his landlady of his discomfort. Soldiering on, he began the day with a cup of hot chocolate, always good for chest pain, and shared a breakfast with friends, all the while complaining about how miserable the political climate had become in his home state. Thank goodness things are so much better nowadays, right? At 11 a.m., a carriage arrived to take him to the Senate. By the time he arrived in the Senate chamber, his chest pains had grown so severe that he spun around and headed right back to his boarding house. As Gerry returned home, a doorman noticed his obvious distress and asked if he was sick. Gerry said yes, and then had to be carried up to his room and laid in bed. He would soon grow delirious and died of a heart attack within minutes. The Senate adjourned their session upon learning of Gerry's death. His hometown paper would note simply that he, quote, expired suddenly at Washington and was interred the following day at Congressional Cemetery. Gerry remains the only signer of the Declaration of Independence to be buried in Washington, D.C. The day after his death, Gerry's chair was shrouded in black by the Senate, and members wore a black band of fabric on their arms for 30 days in his honor. The suddenness of Gerry's death left a vacuum in political leadership. Interestingly, the vice president who immediately preceded Gerry, George Clinton, also died while in office, and Clinton's body was temporarily housed at Congressional Cemetery. Kind of makes you wonder about James Madison, the only president who had 2 vice presidents die on him. Was it coincidence? Or murder? Anyway, after Gerry's death, the vice presidency once again became vacant, and remained so until the end of Madison's second term. Fellow politician and Continental Congress member Rufus King wrote of the news to John Adams, reporting that, quote, another of the patriots of the Revolution is gone. Gerry and his wife Ann Thompson had 9 surviving children. Ann lived until 1849, the last surviving widow of a signer of the Declaration of Independence. Unfortunately for her, Gerry died without leaving much behind in the way of cash. Although he had some real estate holdings, they proved difficult to sell off, so in order to help his widow, Gerry allies in the Senate introduced a bill that allowed his vice presidential salary to be transferred to Ann. The measure passed the Senate, only to fail in the House of Representatives over fear it would set a bad precedent. Fortunately, Gerry's sons were given political appointments and were able to support their struggling mama. Gerry also had a town in Massachusetts named after him, and although it was later renamed Phillipston, it's still the place my grandparents are from. Hi, Nana. Now, let's go see where he's buried. Elbridge Gerry is buried in Section 1, Range 29, Site 10. Let's go find him. Here he is. Let's have a discussion of grave importance, shall we? Gerry's grave is, in actuality, a monument paid for by the United States government. In fact, it's one of the first monuments ever paid for by the United States. It's made of marble, cost $1,000, big money back in 1823, and was commissioned 10 years after Gerry's death through the legislative efforts of Massachusetts Senator James Lloyd. I guess the Congress felt bad after stiffing Gerry's widow. The monument was how they made up for it. It was carved by John and William Frazee, two brothers who were known for their exquisite marble busts and their design of the U.S. Custom House on Wall Street, which you might know today as the site of Federal Hall in New York City. The Frazees described their Gerry monument as done in an antique style and made to resemble an Egyptian tomb in terms of both its strength and beauty. Above is an urn, which was modeled on a Greek vase, and the whole is topped with a towering animated flame, which the brothers needed 2 months alone to carve. The duo also wanted to include Gerry's profile on the side of the monument, but at the cost of appropriating $150 for the extra carving, Congress said, no thanks, inscriptions alone would have to do. On one side of the monument, the announcement is made, "The tomb of Elbridge Gerry, Vice President of the United States, who died suddenly in this city on his way to the Capitol as President of the Senate, November 23, 1814, aged 70. The opposite side is adorned with Gerry's own words, quote, "It is the duty of every man, though he may have but one day to live, to devote that day to the good of his country." If you enjoyed the video today, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Plus, if you want to learn more about Historic America, support us on Patreon, or check out our new podcast, A Place in Time, don't forget to visit us at www.historicamerica.org. This and more information about everything we covered in today's video can be found below in the description. Make sure to check out our other videos we upload regularly. For Historic America and Dead, White, and Blue, I'm Aaron Killian, and I'll see you inside the cemetery.